There we go. We're going to come right back out of recess
You can bring another chair.
as everybody adjusts to the next room, and we apologize for having to switch rooms. We're blaming it on the speaker for scheduling sessions. Okay, so with that, we're out of recess, and Representative Myra has the next question. Representative Myra.
Madam Chair, thank you. Representative Norton, I'd like you to comment or elaborate on two sets of numbers. Earlier in testimony, I'm not sure who said it, but there was a comment made that 7 million visitors to the Rochester area, and after this project it would increase to about 12 million. In anticipation of this time, I was looking at different websites on Rochester. The Mayo Clinic website says more than 350,000 patients from all walks of life seek answers at Mayo Clinic each year. The Rochester, Minnesota Hotel Things to Do visitor information website, rochestercvb.org, says, did you know Rochester welcomes 2.75 million visitors annually? Plan your trip today. And also, did you know Rochester welcomes 763,000 patients and their families annually? The Wikipedia, whatever you think of that, but Wikipedia says Mayo employs over 30,000 people in the city and every year draws over 2 million visitors to the city. My concern is about two sets of numbers. One is the comment earlier that there were 7 million visitors per year and that would grow to 12. And my second set of numbers is on the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce letter and also elsewhere I've seen that the proposed growth would be 35,000 to 45,000 jobs. I'd like explanation of both of those numbers, and if you could just elaborate how those were arrived at.
Madam Chair?
Representative Norton.
I can give just a quick overview, and then either the gentleman on either side of me can answer more detail. But I can tell you the 2.7 million are unique visitors. Often patients that come to Mayo Clinic stay longer and visit more often. They don't just come one time. So that's part of the difference, is that it is a unique visitor versus and there is a difference between visitors to the city of Rochester and patient visitors to Mayo Clinic, because we also have people that come to Rochester for other reasons other than Mayo Clinic numbers. So that's part of the answer. The other part is how many jobs will be started. And I think perhaps either the gentleman can address the specifics, but we have 25 to 35,000 new jobs anticipated. But there are some, and I alluded to this earlier, that are direct jobs that are a direct result of Mayo Clinic's investment, and there will be other jobs that are generated by the public infrastructure and private investment. So you'll see different numbers based on how you're defining that. And so if either of the gentlemen want to talk further about that.
Sure. Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, we use visitation as the kind of the key metric when we measure these big economic development initiatives, because it's visitation that drives spending. But there's always a little bit of confusion over how these statistics come together because of what Representative Norton said. A visitor and a visit are not one and the same. A visitor can generate multiple visits in a year. If you think of someone that could come to Rochester for an event at the convention center, that individual could come 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year. We would count that as 5 visits, meaning 5 overnight stays, spending 5 times in restaurants, renting a car, what have you. So we're less concerned about the number of visitors. We're more concerned about the number of visits, because that's what drives spending. In the case of Rochester today, you've got roughly an equal number of visits generated that total about 7 million, about half of which are driven by Mayo. The other half are just driven by the community, as you would experience in any city around Minnesota. As to jobs, again, Representative Norton explained it very well. The difference in the criteria that we use for jobs is when we say 35,000 new jobs, we project those to be 35,000 new direct jobs, meaning those are jobs that are generated in the city of Rochester as a result of the investment that is made publicly and privately. Inevitably, what happens, though, is when you create that type of job growth, There are other new jobs that are created. Could be, for instance, with 5 million new visits generated in Rochester, that's going to have a significant impact on the airport, say, here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So that will add to the job base in the state of Minnesota. We call that an indirect job. That's not a job that's generated specifically in Rochester because of the dollars that are invested, but it's the multiplier effect that occurs elsewhere in the state of Minnesota. That, we project, could generate an additional up to 10,000 indirect jobs, which is how you get up to the 45,000.
Representative Myra.
Madam Chair, testifiers, Representative Norton. So I think I understand what you're saying. When you said 7 million, you were talking about visits. And on these other sites, it wasn't the Mayo Clinic, it was the visitor information and Wikipedia. They were talking about visitors. So
Right.
I can see the distinction now, and I appreciate that clarification. Right. I served on taxes last session, and, you know, we got some estimates, and they kind of fell flat, and so that's why I'm pursuing this a little bit. You said that we came up with the 35,000, and then you explained that the additional 10,000 jobs was indirect. We, you meaning you or your firm? Or where did those numbers come from?
Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, Madam Representative, when I say we, I mean the working team that has been engaged by Mayo and the community to put the whole strategic plan together for the DMC. So it's my firm, the Hammes Company. We've had a number of other consultants, CSL, which is a Minnesota firm, who are specialists in doing these economic and fiscal impact studies and doing this type of forecasting. Most of the forecasts that are developed are put together around models that are consistently used for and applied in this kind of an economic development setting. So when we talk about job growth, in the case of Rochester, it's fairly it's easier to predict because of Mayo as the base. We don't often have that type of base with all that historical data that we can lean on. So it's highly predictable because of Mayo. Then what we use are models that for every job that is generated, direct job that is generated, there's criteria that we use that by SIC code define where there will be additional indirect job growth by industry, hospitality, really across industry lines. So it's all economic modeling that's used consistently throughout the country.
Representative Meyer.
Madam Chair, Mr. Dunn, that is very helpful. So it's not like it's a wish list that we're hoping that we can come up with this many jobs, but there is some analysis that was done based on historical results elsewhere in the country. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, that's exactly right. I mean, these are very conservative models. I think it would be fair to say I'm more confident we've underestimated than overestimated. And I say that, again, because of the whole economic model here is being built around the historic growth that we've seen from the Mayo Clinic. That dominates the statistics that we've generated.
Representative Meyer.
Madam Chair, Mr. Dunn, could you just elaborate a little bit more on 35,000 to 45,000? When would you expect these jobs to be coming in? Is it at the front end? Is it down 30 years from now? What would the employment pattern look like?
Mr. Dunn.
That's my last question. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Madam Representative, the forecasting that we've done is over a 20-year period of time. It's not, I wouldn't tell you that it's uniformly applied over that 20-year time horizon. I think what you're going to see is what we experience on most projects. All this one is of a magnitude beyond what we're accustomed to dealing with. But I think what you're going to see is there's going to be a startup period where you're going to see a significant amount of job growth. Then it's likely to trend upward from there. And then after maybe 7, 8 years, it will get to a more consistent annual level of growth. So I think in the first, I would say, 4 to 8 years, you're going to see a substantial amount of growth at a rate that would outpace the balance of the 20-year time horizon.
Thank you.
The only other point that I would make that I think is important to understand as it relates to jobs here is the base of jobs that are being created here, because they're in the medical sector, are jobs that are, by national average, tend to be above national average in terms of the wage base, the household income that will be generated, and as a result of that, the tax base that will be generated. So I don't distinguish. I'm asked all the time, good jobs, bad jobs. A job is a job today. and the jobs being created here cover the full spectrum of job growth. But statistically, when we look at that amount of growth, 25, 35,000 new jobs, on average, they will be well above the national average in terms of household income that is being generated.
Thank you. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I get into my questions, maybe I have a question for you, but just maybe I want to understand a little bit about process. Now, we've split this bill, or we've stripped out some of the provisions, and we've sent that off to the bonding committee. I guess I'm curious to see or hear where that piece might be. And secondly, I'm hearing some talk about some alternatives, if you will. And I'm just curious on process going forward, what the plan is, if you will.
Great question. So the actual House File 409 has moved along to Representative Hausman's committee, although we kept the tax provisions here since this is the committee that would have to do all the items that relate to taxes, which is the crux of this bill or this proposal. And so I think what we would anticipate is if Representative Hausman used state bonding capacity, then she would have to carry that in that bill. If we use local bonding issuance, we'd carry it in this bill because the public finance article resides within the tax committee. And so if we were, as a group, wanting to proceed with some proposal, working with Representative Norton and her team of people and Representative Liebling and others, I think we have a lot of items we can work with here. And so as to a plan B, at least for my part, I will say, and Representative Norton can jump in here, I know many of you have met with different parts of the whole proposal here, whether it's with Senator Senjum or Representative Norton or Representative Liebling or Representative Davids or labor unions or the folks down at the Mayo, the medical community, or the mayor and his group and the council or the county commission and the developer. And so many legislators are hearing about a lot of different things. And, I am aware that the Senate is looking at some things, as is the governor. So as to a Plan B sort of proposal, at least from my viewpoint here in the House, is, I think we've tried to be fairly open here about asking the local community to work with us to do a little bit heavier lift on kind of a menu of options for financing. And so within that bucket, all of which sit in the purview of this committee, we could review amusement taxes, entertainment taxes, liquor taxes, lodging, food and beverage, an extension on the local option sales, property tax, TIF, abatements, the income and sales proposal they've got. So there's all kinds of levers in this committee, whether it's local or statewide, and my guess is we're looking at a combination of both. And I think one of the key pieces, of course, is who's going to issue the bonds if this were to go forward, and a public finance model with the city of Rochester involved would be held in this committee. So Representative Hausman might have other views about if she would like to put this proposal in her bonding bill, and if that were the case, the bonding authority would be carried by Representative Hausman, and we couldn't really do that here. So that's kind of where we're at. And for my part on working with the folks here, and they should jump in. I know I'm frustrating to them. I will say that, but I think we all have strongly held views, and I'm trying to get sort of the best bargain for the taxpayer here. If the legislature can move forward, and I can tell you both sides of the aisle have told me very clearly, privately, they're very supportive of the project, or they're not so supportive of the project, and it's really what can get the votes to pass that can make it through the Minnesota House. So I know Representative Norton and all the people who are working on this project are meeting with a lot of legislators, and so my hope, if we can get there, is that any provisions we would look at would be put out for the public by either Monday or Tuesday at the latest. So today is Wednesday, so a real short window, and so folks who want to get more involved with Representative Norton and others should do so now if you are not. Because we are really asking the House research staff, and Senate council is working at it, and the governor's staff to sort of understand the capacity of the local community, understand what the state might be interested in could pass, and understand better where the debt capacity could be held if the project was to move forward. So I'd ask Representative Norton to tag on to that to see what she thinks about what I'm saying now. So Representative Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Simonson. I think I will just let you know that we talked about Plan B or A+. I think we are looking, after having heard from Representative Hausman, her concerns about the debt capacity of the state, given the, well, there's a number of things that have happened, including the Vikings and, you name it. We are watching the tobacco settlement. Those, the debt capacity from those bonds are now rolling over from Rule 1 to Rule 2, for those of you that serve on capital investment and understand this. And it is concerning to her that the state's debt capacity moving forward, maybe not this year or next year, but maybe another year out, would be seriously impacted if we continue to move forward with yet another large project. And I will say, we don't know yet with the University of Minnesota what's going to happen with that. That is yet another, potential bonding for the University Hospital project out there. So in hearing those concerns, and she's a wonderful chair on capital investment and has, as our chair in this committee, has very strong opinions about what's appropriate and not for that committee. We heard that, and so we are looking at revenue bonds that could be let locally so as not to impact the state's bond capacity. They're a little more expensive. But I think we're trying to find a way to manage those, as well as the chair talked about turning on some triggers, as you call it here in this committee. I've not served on taxes, that would allow the city to have a larger portion, a larger investment in the DMC project. And so we are looking at some of those too, and I think you'll see something, early next week that we'll make public, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions. It's not that the concept of how it works is not significantly different than the concept we're talking about now. It just shifts a little bit about who's going to put more in and how and where it's going to come from.
Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you as well for that, because that is helpful. And just so I'm clear, and you talked about Monday or Tuesday of next week, but I'm assuming that we've got to take some sort of action by some specific day. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, my intent, I've heard Representative Davids and I think Representative Garofalo say that they're projecting that, if we were to try to address the DMC project in the omnibus tax bill, that's a, all is lost perspective. I profoundly and completely disagree with that, just to put that on the record. The only way to pass a large controversial project where many members have concerns and issues and provisions is in an omnibus tax bill. And in fact, the likelihood of most projects standing and passing because alone are small, because people have to vote to pay for them. And that's why it's difficult for me to see, unless I hear soon, and I said this last time it was raised, if people would like to tell us which taxes they will vote to increase to pay for this project, I'm all ears, but the silence is deafening, and I think this project, we understand, will take money. And so we will have to pay for the money. It is a line on the spreadsheet. And so that would be part of the omnibus tax bill is my intent. Certainly if people can come up with something that they think can get 68 votes and work and gain the support of the Mayo folks and the local community and their local legislators, that's certainly an alternative I'm sure we'll take a look at as an amendment or as a standalone bill. But I have not heard that yet from anyone, and I will tell you that there are just a lot of pieces to this bill, and to even try to do it in one legislative session is difficult. And I should take this moment, and I know Representative Norton would back me up on this, to really thank all the nonpartisan staff throughout the Capitol complex who is really working very hard to understand what the advocates are saying, and I know that your team is too, Representative Norton. It takes a lot of education of one another to even hear each other first, and I think that objective has been realized. I think people are now starting to at least hear each other's positions. So, we're still working on it. We have 5 weeks to go, and then the conference committee process starts. So it is my intent that if this legislature and this committee, and bipartisanly, would like to do something on this proposal this year, that we would need to get it to tax conference committee so that it could be completed before the end of the session. And I know people feel differently about that in this room, but I'm open to other options if people can bring them forward, but that has not yet happened. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that kind of answers my process question, so I appreciate that. But I do have one question for Representative Norton. This gets maybe back to the project itself. But And I apologize if maybe you've talked about this in the past, but it has been so many times and so long that I probably forgot. But I recall when the proponents of the bill first came before me and met with me, which seems like ages ago. But one of the things that we talked about was some comparison to other hospitals in other states, and some big names were dropped, and we talked about that. And one that sticks out in my mind that we talked about was Cleveland Clinic, for whatever reason. But I'm just wondering if you can maybe give me a sense of and I'm assuming that in your world you would call this a competitor, perhaps. Perhaps not, but I'm wondering if you can give me a sense of some things that have been done in other states, Ohio perhaps, in which their state legislatures worked with those competitors, if you will, just to give me a sense of what's happening across the country. I have a pretty good sense now of what's happened in Minnesota over our history, but what I don't have a good sense of is what's happening in other states with some of these other larger hospitals, if you will. So,
Representative Norton. Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, Mr. Representative, very good question. I would start by saying, if we were having this conversation 10, 15 years ago, the answer would be very different. The worldwide competitors that Mayo faced back then were very different than the competitors that they face today. You mentioned Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland's probably the best example, certainly one of the best examples right now that we would point at. And in Cleveland, there are two things happening. There's a major effort underway in the state of Ohio, in the city of Cleveland, centered around the Cleveland Clinic, to really build on the economic base and the anchor that the Cleveland Clinic represents in that city and that state. What does that mean tangibly? At the state level, at the local level, there's been substantial public funding, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in a very short period of time, meaning the last 5, 6, 7 years, that have gone into a variety of different projects that would qualify as infrastructure. Easiest example I can point you to is what they call the Medical Mart. The Medical Mart has been developed in downtown Cleveland. It's a multi-hundred-million-dollar project that is really about bringing the medical industry from around the world to Cleveland, sort of in partnership with the Cleveland Clinic, to bring industry and the clinic together to showcase where medical technology is going. That's a way that Cleveland has seen to really build its economy around the Cleveland Clinic. Short of the Cleveland Clinic, it'd be very hard to do that in that community. In addition to that, there is what's referred to as the Health Technology Corridor, which really runs from where the Cleveland Clinic is located outside of true downtown Cleveland to downtown. It's all built around rail infrastructure. In the last half a dozen years, during the worst economic crisis of our lifetime, there have been billions of dollars invested, many new jobs created around the Health Technology Corridor. And these are high-tech jobs, again, built around the medical industry. Again, hundreds of millions of dollars of private investment, a substantial hundreds of millions of dollars of public investment in a very, very short period of time. So in a lot of ways, you could draw parallels in a variety of different ways to what's occurring in Cleveland. And Cleveland's not the only example, but the point is major economic development initiative, substantial public and private funding, all built around the medical industry and the uniqueness of the Cleveland Clinic. What's a little bit different about Cleveland Clinic, though, is Cleveland Clinic is not just expanding at that level in Cleveland. They're also one of the worldwide competitors that I mentioned earlier that is also branching out around the world. They're creating major destination medical centers elsewhere around the world. That is not the Mayo model. Mayo wants to concentrate its investment, its development, its job growth in one place. They want to make that investment here in Minnesota. So I can't give you 50 examples because there's only a handful of these major medical institutions that can become the world leaders. But of those that are positioned to become that, all of them are making major investment publicly and privately in the medical center and in the communities that surround the medical center.
Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that answer. That is very helpful to me, and I appreciate that. So thank you, and I think that'll hold for now.
Thank you. Representative Benson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have a question for the testifiers, but I just wanted to make a comment about the discussion that you just had concerning the issue of paying for things. I've been here for 6 years, and many people have all kinds of great ideas. And then when it comes to paying for it, we have silence. So that's what this issue is about for me. This legislature and this governor have made it a high priority to finally get us out of this structural deficit that the state has been facing for a number of years, and to do it. And the debate is, should we do it all with cuts or a mix of cuts and revenue increases? I happen to think the mix is the better solution. So I just want to make that comment because that's where the rub is. There is no free lunch. But I do believe in investments, and I believe in public investments. The only question is, do we have a good public investment that has the potential for a good return for the people of the state of Minnesota? That's the issue. So I don't have a problem with making public investments. I just want to make sure, and I'm sure you do, and most people in this committee do, that this is a good investment that has a long-term potential return for the voters and the people who work here in our state. But my question, if I may, Madam Chair, is for our testifiers, and it has to do with some of the questions that Representative Myra was asking, but more specifically about the Mayo Clinic itself. I'd like to know, of the potential 35,000 or plus jobs that may or may not be created, what percentage of that, what numbers do you see actually the Mayo Clinic hiring? And I'm also interested in following up on this expansion of your medical center. What kinds of areas that the Mayo Clinic presently offers will see a major expansion, or are there new areas that the Mayo Clinic will be emphasizing with this investment? What will the Mayo Clinic look like as far as the kinds of services it will be providing for the potential clients in the future with this expansion?
Dr. Nark.
Madam Chair, Representative Benson, I've been criticized for this answer in the past, but the future is difficult to predict, but we can rely on what we've done in the past. And so let's take just the most recent example of a large investment the Mayo Clinic is making, $190 million for the heavy proton beam. The heavy proton beam is a technology that allows us to release the energy to destroy a tumor in a very localized area instead of like an electron beam where it comes in one side of the head with the same energy exiting. So we think that it's going to be worthwhile mostly for kids. And so we're investing $190 million in that project. It involves hiring 10 physicists, 8 radiation oncologists, nurses, all the way down the line. And what we usually do is when a new technology comes into being, we usually aren't the first ones there. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing how it's used, and then we see how we can integrate that into the practice. And so we build that infrastructure, and then we add the jobs. So it's sporadic. But as Mr. Dunn articulated before, if we look at our growth from the early 80s to the present time, we've added about 18,000 jobs. And I would think that while I can't predict exactly when they're going to come, what direction we're going to go, we know that there's going to be a requirement for more health care in this nation as we age. That's something we absolutely know. There's 2 examples that I'd use for things that are rapidly growing right now where we will be adding people. And they're kind of dramatic things, but 5 years ago we built an MRI operating room, which is the most expensive operating room that we have because of the shielding and what had to happen. And we built a big operating room, and you had a track on it, and we can take the patient sterilely into the MRI scanner and see what tumor we resected or what we've done to that brain and image it and then go back and do more without changing all the sterile drapes. We use it for that purpose almost never now. We use it now almost exclusively for deep brain stimulation, where we take people with Parkinson's disease mostly, but other movement disorders. We bring them into that MRI operating room, and we sterilize their head, and I sedate them just slightly. We numb up their skull, drill a hole in it, and we put an electrode in that's several inches long. Mm-hmm. And as soon as that electrode gets into the deep brain, the subthalamic area, the tremors go away. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's growing. We're doing about 100 a year right now. We think the indications for that are going to dramatically increase. And so since we're leaders in that technology, and almost all the devices are made by Medtronic right here in the state, that would be a synergy that we would want to amplify, going forward. A very similar thing electronically, again with Medtronic, is heart rhythm services, where we know if your heart isn't perfectly regular, that your life is going to be shortened. So we do everything that we can to ablate dysrhythmia sections, keep people in non-atrial fibrillation issues and things like that. It involves pacemakers, defibrillators, all the things like that. And that's rapidly growing. So as the technology comes, it grows. I can't predict exactly what's going to happen, but we think that a lot of medical care is going to involve these devices in the future because my kids don't want to go and see the doctor. And so how that's going to happen, we don't exactly know, but we're experimenting with the 65,000 lives that we insure as part of our own medical plan. So we're doing many more virtual consults. Nobody goes to see a dermatologist anymore right away. We get consults for the subspecialties of medicine virtually because it involves laboratory assessment, knowing what's in that history, and we can get those opinions without having you go into a waiting room to wait and then go in and see the doctor and go. The only issue with that is we don't get reimbursed for most of it. That's why we're doing it with our own population now. So as medicine changes, it could be we have a whole building full of people that are doing virtual work for the nation because of the expertise that we have in different subspecialties. So that's an unsatisfying answer, but I think that our history shows that we do have a process for the growth and a logical way of doing it.
Just a quick follow-up on that. When we think of the Mayo Clinic versus the Cleveland Clinic or Johns Hopkins or others that would be your competitors, are there areas in which the Mayo Clinic sees these other destinations moving forward, areas that you will want to increase investments in order? Are there? I don't know how much you want to publicly discuss it.
Well, I mean, I think what we're just passionate about right now is we have to decrease the cost of the care that we're giving. We're bankrupting the nation as a health care environment. And so we're passionate about proving what the things are that we bring to the table for medical care that are of value. They prolong meaningful life. They prevent complications. We intervene in a massive way for total hip, total knee, big tumor resection, and whatever. How can we do that as safely as possible with the fewest infections? And now the population is aging, and the population is getting much, much more obese. So anytime I intervene in that population, there are more risks. Mm-hmm. So I think passionately what we're trying to do is prove our value, and we participate in more entities to quantitate what we're doing really than any of our competitors right now. So it doesn't matter if it's the U.S. News and World Report hospital ranking or the National Surgical Quality Improvement Program for different metrics in our surgical practice, or most recently Consumer Reports for the safest hospitals in the United States, or the University Health System Consortium. We participate in all of them because we're passionate about proving to the insurers and to the government and to the payers what is of value and how are we going to take all of medicine to the next level.
Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up. We have this national law now called the Affordable Health Care Act. I thought it would have been a good idea if the federal government had simply taken the model, that the Mayo Clinic has been working on to improve services with a reduction in costs. I'm just curious, and I hope I'm not going too far afield, Madam Chair, but when you look at the Affordable Health Care Act, and we've passed the exchange here now in the state of Minnesota, is that act and its directives compatible, do you feel, with what the Mayo Clinic has been attempting to do as far as cost control?
Dr. Nair.
Madam Chair,
without causing.
I believe there's no. I've studied this act a lot, and they're asking me to speak about it in many of my different professional venues. I personally don't necessarily agree perfectly with the politics, but there is a genius to how it was put together. And I believe the state of Minnesota, with your guys' leadership in forming an exchange instead of waiting for a product that's going to be okay for the other 25 states in the union that are throwing their hands up, I think is prescient. And I think that the reason it is like that is because of the resources that we have in this state for medical care. And I can't predict what it's going to be, but I think with the horsepower that we have on the medical side and on the state side here, that we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to adapt to the changes. We'll figure out that it's not bad to have everybody universally insured. We're going to figure out also that one of the mechanisms is by driving a little bit more market force into things by using the Cadillac Health Plan tax so that I'm going to have a baseline level of coverage, and if I desire something above that, there's going to be market forces that are going to drive me. I'm going to have to pay for that more personally instead of having employers just do it. So I think that yes, I think we're ready for it, and I don't want to back down from that challenge.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes,
Madam Chair,
Representative Norton.
could I just add, just as an informational piece, I've had a couple members say, well, isn't this competition with the hospitals in our local community? And I just want to clarify for folks, Mayo Clinic, like the Cleveland Clinic and Johns Hopkins and some of the competitors that we talk about, they are different than just a hospital in a town. We have those as well, and we do provide generalized care, but we have an integrated healthcare system that has a model that's patient care, education, and research. And it's those components that you're hearing the passion here, because not only do we just provide care, we train doctors and nurses and allied health, and now with our link to the University of Minnesota Rochester, we'll have more folks coming out that are trained for the needs of tomorrow's healthcare. But we also have research, and everything Mayo does is centered around those three things. So it is a little unique, and I just thought I'd set that out there as long as we're having this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Representative Anzels, then Davids.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought Representative Myra's line of questioning regarding the jobs part of this was very appropriate, especially for an informational hearing. But I thought that the author and the testifiers were a little too bashful in your responses. And I want the members to know very clearly that this is one of the leading employers in the country in terms of relationships with people who build things. The building and construction trades throughout the many years have been hired through regional and local area signatory contractors. This is an employer that understands community. This is an employer who understands local building and construction contractors that hire local people and people from Minnesota. So I just wanted to get that out, that on the building side, historically this has been a great employer, and I have no reason to believe that that's going to continue should this project go forward, and I count me as a supporter. Count me as a supporter, frankly, because as a person from the Iron Range, we have come to this legislature many times, and we've asked, and Republicans and Democrats have responded. And you've helped us, and by helping us, you've helped the entire state. Because quite frankly, unless we create some jobs on the Iron Range, we're all coming to live next to you. And so that was a little off, but you have been good to our area, and the range delegation, I'm sure, is going to be with a little more convincing, Representative Norton. I think the range delegation is going to be supportive to this project. So good luck to you and to the people at the Mayo.
Thank you. Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to say that when I first started meeting with the Mayo Clinic on this issue, I think it was September, August or something last year, I realized that, well, they say patience is a virtue. I would question that. But I say a prayer every night for patience, and it goes something like this: Dear God, give me patience and give it to me now. So we have to kind of understand where I'm coming from. I really believe in this bill, this project, as presented, and I hope we can be there. A couple quick things. First of all, I think I want to stand up just a bit here for Dr. Noseworthy, and I would have to respectfully disagree with my good friend Chair Lesh. If you read what he said, the headline kind of isn't the best probably, but if you read what he said, he's just telling the truth. I mean, he's just calling it the way it is, and I happen to respect that. And I really don't understand what the big deal is there. I think Dr. Noseworthy just called it the way he saw it. He says he wanted to emphasize the Mayo Clinic is not threatening to leave Rochester. And so I hope members will just take a look at what was said there, and I don't really think it's all that bad. A couple things. We're building a bill here, hopefully, that can pass and becomes law, and then I hope we don't come a year or two from now here, and make a whole lot of change, because there's a lot of trust that needs to be done here. And that's why my first remarks were as they were, that you do something, you cut the deal's the deal. I have a question for the chair, and then I'd like to make a few comments about Representative Norton. As far as, Madam Chair, the $585 million, and I don't expect an answer right here. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But of the $585 million, we've heard from others, Rochester, Olmsted County, others need more skin in the game. I think it would be extremely helpful, as soon as we could, to let them know what that number is. What's the skin in the game the legislature wants, so that they can plan for that. I really think that's only fair, and I don't expect an answer today, and I know you're giving that some thought, but we talk about more skin in the game. How much skin? How much more for the county? How much more for the city? And so I think that would be good to be working on that, and we don't have a whole lot of time here. And I would just like to, if I could, for Representative Norton, I think a lot of members and a lot of the public don't really understand what your original proposal does, because you made the comment earlier that there's very minimal risk to the state here. And the way I look at it, and I had somebody from my district send me an email the other day, just rip me to shreds, how can you do this for Rochester, all you're doing this stuff for Rochester, and on and on and on. And I just emailed back. I said, 45,000 new jobs, virtually no risk to the state. I'll do that deal all day long. Send. I'm not very good at typing. And he emailed me back. He said, really? And I said, really? Now, if you would, tell me where I'm wrong on that, because I don't want to be telling people the wrong thing. I don't want to be blowing blue smoke up people's noses and leading them down the path. I don't want to do that. But as I read the bill and went through it, that's the way I see it. I see 25, 35, 40, whatever the number is. I see a whole bunch of really good jobs that really help this state with very minimal risk to the state. And we're talking about, it's a $585 million bailout, or it's a $589 million welfare check. And I get all these emails all the time. That's not the way I see it. And so before you do that, though, I do, in all seriousness, Representative Norton, I want to thank you for your work on this. This has been a lot of work, and you've done a lot of work, and you handled it very professionally, and I really appreciate that. I would just disagree with Groffalo a little bit. He said that there's no other person on the planet could be a better author. I thought of one, but that could be about there, but not quite. So I appreciate very much, in all sincerity, Representative Norton, what you've done and what you're doing and what you're going to do. But could you just boil down a little bit more, really quickly, I think it would be helpful for the committee, the financing part, or maybe the gentleman could, sitting to your left, just for the committee, how does this actually work? Because I don't see it as a $585 million giveaway. I don't see that, because I don't see where the state's at risk, and if the jobs don't come, I don't see really where we're on the hook. If you could just explain that a little better.
Yeah, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually going to let Bob go into the details, but I do want to say, and I was going to say something earlier and I didn't, with regard to Representative Garofalo's comments. I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but the fact is Rochester and the Rochester area sends lots of great legislators to this Capitol, all of whom are very capable of carrying this bill. So I feel honored that I'm able to do it, but there are a plethora of great legislators from the Rochester area that could do it. So,
Well, Madam Chair, I was thinking more of me, but
I have no doubt that that's the case. But nonetheless, there are others that were in this room earlier and that are in this building and across the hall. Well, I guess they're all in this building right now, in the Senate and the House that could have and are doing it. So with that, I'm going to let Bob answer the question, and then if there's anything else, we'll follow up.
Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, Mr. Representative, you've characterized the bill, I think, very well. The structure that we've proposed is one where we're trying to reverse what is normally done in these big economic development initiatives. What normally happens with this type of project and proposal is the public and private dollars go in fully day one. Take a stadium, take any corporate initiative like this. In almost every case, the investment comes in day one, and you are forecasting what the growth is going to be in terms of jobs and tax base. And I do this all day long, every day. Never before have I seen a single proposal like this where the fiscal impact was anywhere near as significant as what we're showing here as a result of the job growth. So what we've done here is literally to reverse all of that. In the case of the DMC proposal, the way that it works is private investment, private dollars are spent first. When those private dollars are spent, it's inevitable that jobs are created. You can't build the type of infrastructure at the medical center that we're talking about. Dr. Nahr touched on a very relevant example, the proton beam facility. When you spend those private dollars, you're generating substantial growth in jobs. So the burden is on the private sector to spend its money, which will generate job growth. Once we have job growth, there's one thing we know with absolute certainty. There will be new taxes. And so what we've proposed is that once the private dollars are spent and the jobs are created and new taxes are generated, that a portion of those taxes would be used to build the infrastructure that is needed to draw in additional private investment, additional jobs, further growing the tax base. So in a very simplistic way, that is the format of the bill. Now, in the recent weeks, we've been working on a variety of ways to improve that will make it easier to administer, a more straightforward process in terms of how this mechanism will function year to year. But what has not changed is the underlying principles that this is led by private investment, and only when the job growth is secured and the private investment has occurred, only then are we eligible to use a portion of that growth in taxes to build public infrastructure.
Thank you.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, please, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Davids, let me read exactly what I was upset with Dr. Noseworthy's comments. He said, with regards to the $585 million that they're asking for from the state of Minnesota, and the fact is, members, you can say, oh, this is for infrastructure, this is something that the state should be paying for anyway, but for them wanting to expand their business, it would not be happening. There are many other parts of the state that need those infrastructure dollars, and has been pointed out previously in committee here, if you're a developer, you build it yourself first, and the taxpayers have to come in afterwards and maintain it, but you build it first. You don't come to the city and ask them for it. But he said, if they say, yes, that's great, we want to stay in Minnesota, Noseworthy said. But he cautioned, if they say no, or you're going to have to go for a bonding bill every year for the next 30 years, we'll have to rethink about whether that's the best use of our money. I'm sure that's true. But the way that's phrased and saying at the National Press Club out in D.C. about the Minnesota legislature is, I think, disingenuous. Because what Mayo's going to do, they're going to make a decision about what makes the best business sense for them. That's what all businesses do. When we gave we offered Saturn $900 million in 1985 to come here to Minnesota, and they didn't come. They went to Tennessee. And you know why they went to Tennessee? They went there because Tennessee bragged that it has the lowest wages of anywhere around they could offer. The subsidy had nothing to do with it. Tennessee didn't offer them a dime. Similarly, Dr. Nahr said they expanded in Florida and in Arizona because it made the most business sense for them. Mayo is going to expand here or not expand based on whether it makes good business sense for them. They have accountants. I have no doubt that the folks sitting up here, Dr. Nahr, wants to stay in Minnesota. If I had raised my kids here, if I had a family, I believe they want to stay in Minnesota. But they have accountants telling them, see where you can get the dimes to expand. That's what accountants do. That's their job. And they're coming to the taxpayers to ask for that. So when he goes out in D.C. and says that to the National Press Club, I think it's an insult to how we're making decisions here, and it suggests that we don't know why they're going to make the decision to expand, and we do. So that's what I was upset about, Representative Davids.
Okay, Representative Loffer.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry I've had other hearings, so I haven't heard all of the presentation, but I understand that some aspects of the project haven't really been discussed yet, and I really want to understand how this fits within it, because as I understood the project, it was really about you have this major employer who is really important to our economy and to healthcare for our country. I mean, you're doing some really wonderful cutting-edge things, and the growth of that would be faster than the capability of the local community to keep up with it in terms of demand for infrastructure. When I think of infrastructure, I think of, sewers and sidewalks, and, you're expanding. And then I got a little confused when it was like, but we can double our space by going up. So then I wasn't quite sure, but I'm sure there's going to be auxiliary buildings, and it looks, I don't know your area enough to read all the maps and pick it all up, but I kind of get the idea. It's broader than that. But then as I'm looking through your infrastructure master plan, I'm kind of surprised that what you're describing as infrastructure includes a $78 million atrium with water features that sounds, as it's described and as it's pictured on page 27 and 28, would be kind of like the conservatory at Como Park, plus lots of other things, maybe restaurants and other sorts of things, kind of a shopping center, indoor park kind of thing, but it doesn't say that there'd be any shopping. But it's to create places for people to spend their time that are attractive. And then I look under civic uses, and there's another $66 million for parks and amenities like music venues, museums, other recreational venues. And, those are the kinds of things that we actually weigh in a really fierce competition in our normal bonding process. And, whether it's the zoo in Apple Valley wanting to add something, or an upgrade to Como, or it's some other community wants to create a museum. We've funded, agriculture museums and veterans museums and all kinds of different things. And those we've got a different structure for dealing with. And that, to me, isn't really core infrastructure, and it's such a huge part of the dollars here. Can you tell me, is that money coming out of the public financing and it's tied to the job development? Is that part of the infrastructure? What's the financing for that part of it?
Mr. Dunn.
Madam Chair, the issues that you're raising, we've spent a lot of time building up the infrastructure master plan, and it's based on the city master plan that was developed a couple of years ago with UMR that began to define how does Rochester need to evolve to become a more vibrant destination. And to take the example that you raised of something like an atrium, I don't think there's probably a better day to point at that as an example, because when you think about Rochester as a destination, we're bringing people here from all over the world who are held captive because of the fact that they're there for reasons that relate to the medical center for days, weeks, and at times months. And these are people who are looking for things to do that they can do no different when they're in their home city. Well, one of the great challenges that we have in Rochester is the weather. One of the things that consistently in our research came up as a negative about Rochester as a destination is the inevitable reality that the weather is challenging a good portion of the year. Nonetheless, we're trying to attract and draw people here to spend dollars as a visitor 12 months out of the year. What do we have to do? We have to build the type of infrastructure that will give people things to do every day of the week, 12 months out of the year. So what does that mean? In the end, we have to create an urban kind of experience that is accommodating to people 12 months out of the year. Exactly how that's going to be done, we can't say that at this point, because the first thing we will do once this project gets moving is we have to establish the development plan. But we know, based in research, that one of the great challenges that we have is the weather is an obstacle that we cannot overcome. There's things we can do to compensate for it, but we can't change the weather here in Minnesota.
And Madam Chair.
Representative Norton.
Thank you. Just to tie that back, if you do look on the sheet that has all the lists, there are some things that are part of just the normal city, and the city will be responsible for that, and part of it is DMC. And so you can see a little bit, while there are a lot of things listed there, not everything is fully funded or even partially funded by DMC, and the list changes, you know, and it will change as the master plan gets built out. I do think, Representative Laughlin, to your concern, yes, it's true that bonding bills do come before this body regularly for different asks. I think, given the description that you just heard about trying to build that core infrastructure in a short period of time for a lot of people and a lot of visitors, Mayo needs assurance, not a promise on a year-to-year ask, before they're going to invest their $3 billion and bring in the private investors that they've talked to and that others have talked to put in that other $2 to $3 billion investment, unless they know there's going to be the support in the infrastructure. So it's because of the fast track that we're on and the fast growth model that we're talking about, it's the assurance that we're looking for. And I think Rochester's hearing pretty well that if we do move ahead with something like this, it's going to be hard to ask for Rochester to come back and ask for things in this body, given what we're asking for right here for our downtown area, and we understand that.
Well, Madam Chair, I would just say that the weather is a difficult challenge for absolutely everyone, and our entire Minnesota economy is based heavily in many parts of the state on tourism. And whether it's Representative Dill's area who can't get snow when they need it for the snowmobilers, or if it's people who don't want to deal with snow and would love to have the skyways or the other amenities that you're putting in here. But some of these things I really think are amenities and not infrastructure, and I think as we look at prioritizing things, quite honestly, I think most people come to Mayo not to have fun, and except if they're doing it as a vacation. But if you're coming to Mayo for serious medical stuff, it's because you really want the absolute best medical care in the world for your loved one, whether you live in the Middle East or you live in rural Minnesota or you live in my district in Minneapolis. You're going there because you want the absolute best possible care you can get. And whether or not you have the best places to have lunch or to wait, you know, in an indoor place where you're killing times between appointments isn't really that important when your health's on the line. And so I really support the idea of trying to deal with the real, what I consider the real infrastructure, but I have some questions about whether this is the right financing for some of the other pieces.
Representative Norton.
And Madam Chair, I would just say, if people were coming for one day, I would completely support you. That's not what they come for. There are people that come for months, and I would say there's a few who have been there for longer than a couple months, who are there, and it becomes a home away from home. They live out of a hotel room or out of Ronald McDonald's house, and in the middle of winter, we do have to find some place for them to go. And this isn't just done on a whim. This is years of research that have been done following patients around and asking patients, what would it take, you know, to make this long stay more appealing, because the research showed the longer people stayed at Mayo, the better they felt about Mayo. The longer they stayed in Rochester, the less their opinion was of Rochester, because we're a town of just over 100,000. We're not millions. We're a tiny town that's growing and growing at a reasonable rate, but this will accelerate that, and we just have to have the assurance that we can handle that rapid growth.
Okay, we made it through the list, so we're going to go to closing comments, and then when we do, after they do that from Representative Norton, we're going to recess for 10 minutes so we can switch up and get to the Viking Stadium, but we'll recess. Representative Norton, closing comments.
Well, members, I really appreciate the time and the questions. And again, I'm in my office or running around in committees like the rest of you. Please feel free to stop me and ask questions as we move forward and as Plan A plus or B rolls out on Monday. We hope it will be something you will like better, not less than the plan that was before you. It will hold that philosophy, hold with the philosophy we brought forward, that investment and growth first before we ask any investment of the state. We really ask your support. We know this is important for the state of Minnesota, and I, for one, want Mayo to grow here, and I hope you do too. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Reps of Norton, Dr. Nahr, Mr. Dunn. Thank you for being here. Members, we're in recess.